Hi, welcome to the Green Room. My guest tonight is Aneesh Sept. Aneesh is an activist, a singer, a writer, an actor, a director, and producer. Aneesh was the first South Asian transgender character on the network TV for a guest role in the NBC sitcom Outsourced. Aneesh received her BFA from New York University's Tisch School of the Arts and her master's in social work. And with that varied background, she's had a successful career both as an actor and as a social worker. She was a counselor with the Trevor Project, an organization that provides counseling to LGBTQ youth, a board member for the HIV organization, the Stigma Project, and a patient advocate at the Beth Israel Medical Center. You may know her from her work in theaters in New York City, San Francisco, Seattle, or touring with the A.R. Rahman Bombay Dreams production. Most recently, she was a recurring guest star on Marvel's Jessica Jones, playing the character of Gillian. In March of 2013, Advocate magazine honored Aneesh on their 40 Under 40 list. January 2020, she became the recipient of the Human Rights Campaign Visibility Award in Cincinnati. The HRC is the nation's largest LGBTQ civil rights organization. Aneesh, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Congratulations on all that you've achieved, and thank you for sticking with us through these technical difficulties. So welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor, and that was quite the introduction. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I wanted to start with the HRC Visibility Award.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit more about the award and just your reaction receiving it.
My reaction receiving it was, I mean, I was working and I came out of work. I finished my day at 6 o'clock and I got on my phone and, as actors, we're just constantly conditioned to keep hustling, right? So it's like always checking for the next audition or the next gig. And I looked at my phone and I was literally exiting the building and I just stopped when I read it. And at first I thought it was a joke. And I talk about that in my speech at first that I thought it was like some prank that somebody was playing on me. But then of course, I read it over and over and over again, and I mean, I was in complete shock, and truly, truly honored to be the recipient of that award.
Tell us a little bit more about the award. What's the
Yeah.
award for, the Visibility Award?
So the Visibility Award is awarded throughout the HRC sister cities, so Cincinnati, Los Angeles, New York, anywhere where there's kind of like a big HRC hub. Every year they award a Visibility Award to somebody in the community who basically does work furthering the work in the community in terms of visibility for queer people. And so for me, it was around my work being a South Asian trans woman in show business.
Awesome, awesome. Well, congratulations. I
Thank you.
watched the acceptance speech, and in there you talk about something that really kind of hit home. You talk about this concept of being seen, right? And I think about, life right now. We're living in these strange times where we're all kind of apart from each other. And, you know, people that were marginalized before are having an even harder time being seen. Just because of the pandemic, just because of this sheer complications that's provided for us, right? And technology only takes you this far, as we
Hmm.
noticed today, right? I
As
mean,
we noticed today, yeah.
so it only takes you this far. So I'm wondering, what advice do you have for people that were already marginalized, right, in terms of you know, their either ethnicity, their sexual orientation, their gender orientation, um, before the pandemic? What can they do now in terms of just, getting themselves more out there and visible?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is to take care of yourself
Hmm.
first and foremost, because what I'm seeing a lot of, particularly around my queer friends and my friends of color, is that we're all exhausted, right? Like we've been exhausted for a very long time. The marginalization is exhausting to begin with, and then you add on top of that kind of this global pandemic that's happening, and then on top of that you have the social justice issues that are really coming to light because of the circumstances of the world around us, because it's an election year, because of all of these things. So I think it's twofold. I think there's an exhaustion in, finally having a lot of people wake up to the marginalization and
Hmm.
oppression that has been happening, and feeling like you can take a breath knowing that there's some allyship that's going to start standing up in ways that haven't before. Um, but then the other side of it is also is that the fight keeps going, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
particularly, I'm not sure what it's like elsewhere, but in New York City, COVID has particularly hit Black and Brown communities very hard by comparison.
Mm-hmm.
So even things like a global pandemic are, further marginalizing groups that have been oppressed. And so, if one is to take care of yourself in order to rest and recover and heal so that the fight can continue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think there's so much of self-care that we're all having to do at this point. Right? There's so many anxieties. You mentioned, the election year. I mean, that
Yeah.
is just an ongoing thing of that.
Yes.
Um, and the anxiety that comes from it, right? The
Yeah.
anxiety of, further oppressions and further injustices and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think it is definitely this kind of like take one day at a time and take care of
Yeah.
yourself. And
Yeah.
so you can continue the fight because we're in it for kind of the long term, right?
It is, yeah. And I think, I'm not sure what it's like elsewhere, right? Like I can
Mhm.
only speak from my experience here in New York, but it almost seems like there's a complacency now, right? That people have gotten a little too comfortable with the fact that the pandemic is still around.
Mhm.
And this is not a friend that we should have around for a long time.
Yes.
There's a fight that needs to happen in order for our society, our economies, for small businesses, for all those things to recover and to heal. We need
Mhm.
to be able to get rid of the pandemic. So I think, you know, it's a fight that is going to, it's a marathon. It's
Mhm.
not a sprint that's going to end next week or next month, or people are like, oh, 2020 when it's over. It's like, well, this is still going to be going on in 2021
Yeah.
unless we actually do things about it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And speaking of doing things about it, I mean, one of the things we have like here in Seattle, there's like the whole Black Lives Matter movement and a lot of protesting that's been happening and a lot of really great activism.
Yeah.
And Pratidwani as a platform is donating to the Seattle Artists Relief Fund. And so I'm wondering, for those of us, and I'm one of these folks that is a little bit nervous about going out and protesting,
Yeah.
pandemic, masks, this, that, even though, they tell us that it doesn't really affect that much. But like, what are some of the avenues that you found other than like, donating to Black Lives Matter movement and organizations that support BLM? But just in terms of broadening that out, other causes, other things that are equally important that we should be pushing for.
Yeah, for me, it's using my social media platforms,
Mhm.
whatever following that I have, whatever. For me, that is my best avenue to get information out. So a lot of it is, reposting information that's important that people are passing around. It's, engaging in conversations with other activists online, um, really finding people to engage in conversation with, I think is really important. Whether you do
Mhm.
that in a group, whether you do that at a protest, whether you do that phone banking, whether you do that on social media.
Mhm.
I think engagement is a form of activism. It's
Mhm.
participation in what is going on. I think
Mhm.
anyone who turns a blind eye or is kind of just not looking at what's really going on must
Mhm.
have some sort of fortitude in themselves to be able to ignore so
Yeah.
much that is going on.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any way to ignore what's really happening in this country. And so I think, yeah, finding engagement, participation in however that looks for you, I think is
Mhm.
really important.
Mhm. Are there organizations that you've donated to or you've been part of that you would recommend, like our audience, look up and donate to?
Yeah, I definitely think South Asians for Black Lives Matter is a
Mhm.
super super important
Mhm.
organization because not only you can donate to them and they help provide resources for the Black Lives Matter movement, but it engages in really important conversations that we as South Asians do not have enough about
Mhm.
anti-Blackness, about unpacking racism,
Mhm.
internalized racism, systemic racism within our own communities.
Mhm.
And I think so for all those that are watching that are of South Asian descent, I think that's a great place to start. Another organization, two that are very, very personal to me. One is Black Trans Femmes in the Arts,
Mhm.
and it really supports Black trans femmes in show
Mhm.
business that are working across all aspects of the industry, behind the
Mm-hmm.
camera, behind the stage, in front of, on the
Mm-hmm.
stage. And the other one is the Okra Project, which is run by a colleague actress of mine. Um, and it's basically, it serves as a great way to provide resources and food for a lot of Black trans people.
I love those. Yeah, I've heard of both.
Yeah.
The South Asians for Black Lives Matter is especially important, because I mean, growing up, we see that kind of systemic racism within our grandparents, parents,
Yes.
generation, right? And
Yeah.
it's kind of taken for granted. Like it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, okay. Um, I know what like when I was dating and getting married, but it's like, oh, as long as the person's not black,
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
you just take it for granted. And it's this whole thing about like starting those conversations, even with people in that generation. And
Yes.
how do you do that in a way that's not attacking them, but yet is bringing them
Yeah.
along, right?
Yeah. I always tell my friends, muck up your houses. Don't be afraid to muck up your houses. I think, and I've noticed it not just particularly within South Asian households, but a lot of other households too. It's like there is a trepidation to talk about these issues within your own family for fear of being alienated,
Mm-hmm.
for fear of being, disowned,
Mm-hmm.
and I understand that, and I understand, you know, family dynamics, particularly when we talk about like nuclear family dynamics
Mm-hmm.
is a very specific type of family dynamic as well. But it is so important that these are where the conversations start.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you can have the courage to look at the people you share your life most closely with and have these kinds of conversations, then you are able to really broaden your sense of conversation and
Mm-hmm.
engagement around these topics.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Just on a different note, I was wondering, you've been doing a lot of, since the pandemic, just a lot of different things. And I just want to hear about what are some of the projects you have going on right now that you're most excited about,
Yeah.
and anything that you can share with us to go and see. Great.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so I when the pandemic started, I spent a lot of weeks just laying in bed and crying because, obviously we had no idea what was going on. And I really admired the folks that I saw in my industry who were almost immediately turning to Zoom, turning to online
Mm-hmm.
platforms to create their art and continue their art. And it took me a while to really do that. But what was engaging for me was, creating work that was meaningful to me. So projects that I had been working on, that I had been, discussing with other and collaborating with other people, and still deciding that no, this needs to continue. We need to figure out a way in order to do that, even with this medium. So I produced and directed two readings of Shakespeare plays online.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I'm a part of some readings online. I did a play that I've been involved with for the past 4 or 5 years. We did an online version of it for Zoom, so we taped that, and that was really great. And then I also, because it's quarantine, I started a YouTube channel, and not not to hope to make millions of dollars on it or something, but because for me, I realized during this quarantine, with no theater, with no
Mm-hmm.
film and TV happening, and only just now is film and TV starting to pick up again,
Mm-hmm.
with the very, very limited opportunities and safe opportunities we have to create art, I needed an outlet for that. And so I was
Yeah.
like, let me just create a YouTube video. And it's a way to, talk about the things that are going on in my life, the things that are important to me, and also the kind of content that I want to create, and having that
Mm-hmm.
control.
Yeah. And how do we find the YouTube channel?
It's it's a lot of work. It's because it's not just the shooting, it's like the planning what you're going to do, and then
Mm-hmm.
the editing it all together, and it's a lot of work, but at the end of the day it gives me something to do, and it's also work that I
Mm-hmm.
really enjoy doing, so I feel
Mm-hmm.
blessed that I have
Yeah, that's
that I have the
cool.
capability to do that. Yeah.
And would we just be able to go on YouTube and type in your name and be able to find the channel?
You should be, yeah, yeah. I don't have many videos. I think I've like only 4 or 5 videos because I just started like a month ago. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'll be
Oh,
putting out new videos every week. So
4 or 5 videos in 1 month is actually pretty impressive.
I'm trying to do one a week, and all the big YouTubers are like, it takes a year of to
Hmm.
get a lot of people engaged, and you have to be posting quite regularly. So I said, if I can do one video a week for now for myself, that's for me, that's something for me. It's not for anybody else. So
Hmm.
I enjoy it. It's good
Yeah.
times. Yeah.
That makes sense. Do you, going back to some of the things you were talking about in terms of that Shakespeare play, I think it was Much Ado About Nothing that you
Yeah.
produced. Tell me a little bit about like what worked, and what didn't work with that. Like, what are some of the things you would do differently going forward?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I did Much Ado About Nothing, and then a month later I did Twelfth Night, and both of those are Shakespeare comedies, and so much of Shakespeare's comedies, particularly Twelfth Night, there tends to be a lot of physicality,
Mm-hmm.
and you rely on the audience being almost another character in the production to really give you feedback about how good your comedy really
Mm-hmm.
is. And when you're doing it on Zoom, you don't have that. You don't
Yeah.
have the privilege of being able to do it in front of people and getting the feedback of whether or not moments, the moments that you think are going to work, whether or not they work over Zoom or something like that. So for me, it was a learning process in that it got the concept, particularly for Much Ado, which I've been
Mm-hmm.
kind of mapping out for the past year or year plus now. Um, for me, it was a great kind of way to be like, okay, this has been put out there. I have a video recording for my own personal use to like study it when I need to,
Mm-hmm.
um, as a way to see story wise and dramaturgically what worked and what didn't work for me. I can't really criticize or judge performances or moments or beats or things like that, because with the added thing of Zoom,
Mm-hmm.
you got to be like, well, it could just be that it's Zoom and
Mm-hmm.
that didn't work over Zoom, but it may work on the stage. So I think it's not in vain. It was certainly part of the developmental process, which was really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is, I mean, I think all of us are learning with
Yeah.
the platform, right? So I think
Yeah.
it's just a journey that we have to go on, and some things work and some things don't work, and I think a lot of what at least I'm craving is just the opportunity to experience it. And
Yeah.
yes, it's not the ideal platform, but it gives me the experience of being involved and being part of the community, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I see a lot of fatigue in my community. Like, nobody wants to come to your Zoom reading. And when I see people post things like that, I'm like, I get it. I get it. There's a lot going on in the world, and there's a lot of conversations that we need to have, and there's a lot of important things that we need to be doing.
Mhm.
But there's also, why can't both exist, right? Why
Mhm.
can't art, why can't people creating art that is beloved to them, that is inspirational for them, exist simultaneously as a therapeutic way to deal with what's going on with the world? If someone wants to go and watch a 2 hour Zoom play because it makes them feel a little bit better, like going back to the beginning of this conversation, taking care of yourself, like
Mhm.
if that is part of your self-care, absolutely do your Zoom reading. Absolutely invite all of your friends. And I think there's
Yeah.
show business, particularly, is, you know, with everything that's going on, I'm still seeing these kind of like gatekeeping hierarchical structures that are still existing. And I'm like, with everything that is going on, you don't even have access to the industry that existed before. Why do you keep perpetuating this kind of
Mhm.
gatekeeping?
Mhm.
So for me, I'm like, do your Zoom projects, do your poetry online, do your
Yes.
concerts online, do it all, because people need it. Art has
Mhm.
been keeping people alive, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you see like, okay, so post-pandemic, do you see everything returning back to normal like it was before, or do you see this kind of platform or, new innovations that could happen here that
Yeah.
could really propel more of these, cross-country collaborations and things that it does provide, right?
Yeah. Well, I first to say, I hope we don't go back to a normal that we
Mm-hmm.
knew before, right? Because I think as a whole, our country needs to see a major overhaul in the way that some of these systems are set up. So I would like to go back to that normal. I would love to create a new normal. In terms of the industry, I hope that, in all industries too, like I'm sure in your industry, you're realizing, you're like, I don't need to be in the office 5 days a week. I can do a lot of my work from home, and there's no reason for me to be in these offices. So I think industries across the spectrum and in show business and tech industries, everything, I think we're really learning how to use this medium, how to use
Mhm.
online engagement, collaboration across the platforms, right? We're in two different time zones
Mhm.
to really create new stuff, to be more inspiring in our work and progressive in the things that we do.
Mhm. Tell me more about what you mean, like progressive, and is there, are you talking about sort of diversity in casting? Are you talking about, innovations in technology as incorporated, like any and all of it?
All of it, all of it.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
certainly diversity and inclusion in terms of my industry, in terms of show
Mhm.
business, but in terms, and I can't speak of the tech industries and all of that, but I hope that innovations have been born out of using this kind of technology the past 7 months.
Yeah.
What new things have people discovered? And not even as I'm saying this, I'm saying, thinking not even in terms of, you know, work, but in interpersonal relationships too. I know that I have gotten infinitely closer with a group of friends that I've known for 20 years, and we've always been really close, but
Mhm.
this has just, we all realize we see each other twice a week.
Mhm.
Before we were seeing each other once a month and getting together for dinner or
Mhm.
brunch or something, but now we see each other twice a week, and we set up a Zoom happy hour twice a week, and
Mhm.
realizing that those interpersonal relationships are also so important.
Yeah.
And I think that that is another benefit that this technology has given us.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And one of the things I kept thinking about is like, theater is so much about community, right? And we have this challenge, and yet we have these opportunities to keep that community not only alive but flourishing,
Yes.
right, as we
Yeah.
go forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is,
Go ahead.
tell me. No, you go ahead.
No, no, go ahead. No, I was just, yeah, I think somebody was like, oh, theater is dead. Someone said that to me. And I said, theater will never be dead. Theater has
Mhm.
been thriving for hundreds, thousands of years. It will, it may not look the same.
Mhm.
Broadway may look very different whenever it comes back in a year or two, but theater will always exist in some form or another,
Mhm.
whether it is, a bunch of people getting together in the park and putting on a play, or whether it's a full staged production in some beautiful grand theater.
Mhm.
It's that art can never be taken away.
Yeah. And I'd love to know, I mean, I'm kind of dabble a little bit in theater, but I'd love to know like really what I can do to sort of support any of these things, right? So like, are there, we talked about organizations for advocacy, for diversity and all that stuff. Are there organizations that are sort of thinking about what's next for theater and that we can donate to or we can be part of?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost is look
Mhm.
at your local communities who
Mhm.
probably need the most help. So within your cities, within your towns, within your state, see what theater companies, what kind of arts is thriving, what exists there, and see what are their needs, right? Because a lot of theaters are like, we've got some donorships that's allowing us to keep the doors open, and we're really grateful for that, but if and when theater does start to come back in 6 to 9 months, we are going to need help in these ways. So
Mhm.
we're looking for, and then there's other people who are like, we need money just to keep our building
Mhm.
standing up, just to keep the lease. So I think finding your local kind of arts scene and engaging with
Mhm.
them in terms of what is the best way to support them is probably a great place to start. And
Yeah.
then of course
Yeah.
you've got a lot of like National Foundation for the Arts and kind of arts relief grants and things like that, that are always seeking fundraising donations to support other artists as well.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. No, those are great suggestions too. I think one of the things that I've been thinking about is, there's so many forms, like you were saying, that activism can take, and you know, you can sit here and do so much from just your computer, from
Yeah,
donating to like being on phone banks and things like that. So there definitely is a lot of opportunities for people, should they choose to kind of go and look for them. Um,
yeah.
One thing I was interested in is like, what are you doing in terms of, we talked about some of your creative endeavors, but what are you doing in terms of your activism and social work part of your life?
Yeah, so a lot of my activism has been engaging like this with a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people, just conversations about things like this. A lot of it is kind of, you know, doing the emailing and the leaving the messages, or getting the this mailbox is full phone calls. A lot of it is having conversations with friends in terms of, you know, what are you doing this week? What are the things that are on the agenda for this month? You know, what are the things? Because there's a lot of people who still don't feel comfortable going out and protesting,
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. So for me, it's been a lot of phone banking, it's been a lot of emailing, it's been a lot of engaging, because I'm also realizing I have a lot to learn, right? My
Mm-hmm.
activism has only taken me so far. You know, I knew so much about, in terms of my own activism as a trans person and as a South Asian person. But in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, there was so much that I'm learning, that we're all learning, you know, and that we're simultaneously also unpacking. So a lot
Mm-hmm.
of it has also been like sitting here and listening and learning, which I think a lot of people need to do as well, which is an important part of the process, you know,
Yeah.
is to really sit and listen to the needs. You know, it's very similar to the conversation about what your local art scenes needs. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
this movement is twofold. This movement is very much about Black Lives Matter, you know, because I think the injustices that Black folk in this country have had to deal with for hundreds of years is nothing compared to the injustices that other, you know, oppressed communities have had to deal with. And so we don't want to co-opt a movement that is not ours. We want to show up and be complete allies and supportive in that way. However, that is also being said that when we are really being good allies, when we back the Black Lives Matter movement, it is also in support of our own movements, that it is also
Mm-hmm.
in benefit of our own movements, that at the end of the day, it benefits all of us.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
while we have to be very careful of not co-opting a movement that is ours, we also have to understand that it is also lending itself to a larger conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, rising tide, right? Like kind of
Yeah,
thing. So yeah, for sure. And there
yeah,
definitely is, you know, I think the whole thing of like listening and being part of any sort of learning and gradual changes is so important right now because we have the time, we have the
yeah,
space to listen,
right,
right?
right.
And, you know, not to say there's a silver lining around this pandemic, but it's given us this
Yes,
opportunity to
yes,
slow down.
absolutely.
Yeah.
To slow down. And I think, you know, particularly when we started to see a rise in the protesting around, after George Floyd's murder, I think, you know, because people have been sitting around for months with, you know, nothing to do, we've been stuck inside, you know, more people are like, we have to show up. This is the time
Mhm,
we have to show up. You know, there is no excuse for us not to show up now.
mhm,
And I'm so glad that they did. And I'm so glad more people are showing up. And I'm so glad that the conversation has become what it is. And
mhm.
I'm really hoping and praying that it is impactful in the next 30 some days, you
Yes.
know, and going forward. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, 30 some days is just now the beginning of like the next chapter of the
Ooh,
conversation of like
yeah.
whatever happens there, what's next, right?
Right.
Because
Right.
nothing's going to be switched off and, you know, it's not going to go. Chances are people are kind of like, oh, maybe it is you know, the old normal we need to go back to, you know, things are
Right.
back
Yeah.
and we, you know,
Yeah.
we need to make money from our theater productions. That means we need to
Right.
do X, Y, and Z, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
It's crazy times.
it is crazy times. And it's definitely one of those things where, you know, it brings me back to what you said earlier, which is just all about taking care of yourself, listening, and just trying to be the best you can every day and continue the fight, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Taking care of yourself is so important right now because, you know, nobody's going to do it. You've got to take care of yourself so then you can
Hmm.
stand there and be there for others as well.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
vice versa, you know?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Allow people to help as
Right,
well.
right. Yeah.
Well, it's been great. I mean, I was always fascinated by, you know, the two worlds that you straddled between social work and acting and directing and all the other stuff that you do in the creative arts.
Yeah.
But I've always been really fascinated by both of those and how you kind of bring them together. And it was such a a great thing to go watch your acceptance speech for the HRC, and just listen to your stories. It's very, very inspirational.
Thank you.
So if you have any last parting words for us, for our audience.
Just be safe, be healthy, stay home when you can. The pandemic isn't over yet. We also have to take good care of each other. Yeah. Oh, sorry. That was my alarm just went off. Sorry, crazy times.
It's
Um,
okay.
yeah, yeah. Stay home and take care of each other. We have a lot of, taking care and uplifting of each other to do, and that happens by taking care of yourself and being good to yourself.
Sounds
Yeah.
good. Anish, again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sticking
Thank
with us through the
you.
technical
Of
difficulties, and I hope
course.
to continue talking to you soon.
You too. Thank you so much for having me, Alpha. This is really great. And it was great seeing you after so long.
Yes,
Yeah.
likewise. All right,
Thank
thanks a
you.
lot. Take care.